You've got 24 hours to tear down that monstrosity or we're calling the sheriff. That's what the HOA president shrieked at me right before I revealed the one secret that would shatter her entire empire. I was only 3 days into building my dream cabin when she stormed onto my property, clipboard in hand and fury in her eyes. Victoria Ashworth, the so-called queen of the HOA, ordered me to dismantle everything for violating community standards. The sharp smell of raw pine mingled with her suffocating perfume as the gravel crackled under SUVs filled with more angry neighbors. She waved stacks of legal papers barking about massive fines, strutting around like she owned the mountains. What she didn't know was that I held information powerful enough to flip the entire board's grip upside down, information that would turn her threats into the most costly mistake she'd ever make. But before I explain how a single phone call legally destroyed an entire HOA, let me ask, what would you do if your neighbors tried to steal your land? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. HOA nightmares connect us all. Let me rewind and show you how this fight began. My name is Marcus Brennan, 45 years old, newly divorced electrician, and heir to 5 acres of Colorado mountain paradise left to me by my eccentric uncle, Silas. After endless courtroom battles and months crammed into a tiny city apartment, this land felt like salvation. It was my chance to build something real, maybe even show my teenage daughter Emma that her dad wasn't the failure everyone thought he was. Uncle Silas was always the family enigma. He vanished into the wilderness back in 1980, then popped up at holidays smelling of smoke and diesel, rambling about the land, hiding secrets. Most relatives called him the crazy hermit uncle. But when his lawyer told me I'd inherited his property, I realized maybe Silas knew something the rest of us never understood. The land was stunning. Clear water raced over smooth creek stones, hawks called across granite cliffs, and the air carried sharp pine mixed with sage. An old concrete slab hinted at a project Silas never finished, and a weathered workshop stood frozen in time like a relic from the frontier. Breathing air untouched by city exhaust gave me hope for the first time in months. I emptied my 401k, quit my job, and committed to building a simple log cabin. Nothing extravagant, just a solid home where Emma could visit on weekends and see her father making something instead of losing everything. The sound of hammers, the rasp of saws through timber, it was the first real therapy I'd had after years of lawyers and bills. Then, on the 3rd day of construction, she appeared. Victoria Ashworth rolled up in a spotless white BMW X5, stepping out like a corporate angel of doom. Mid-50s, designer casual, clutching a leather binder like a weapon. Her heels struck the rocks with military rhythm, and her perfume, a floral chemical cloud, fought violently with the mountain air. "Excuse me," she barked, crossing my property like she owned it. "Are you the individual responsible for this unauthorized construction?" I set down my saw, noticing the way she spit out individual like it was dirt on her tongue. "Marcus Brennan, building a cabin on my land. And you must be Victoria Ashworth, president of Pine Valley HOA." She flipped through her papers with staged authority. "This project violates multiple community covenants. No permits, no design approval, no environmental clearance. Frankly, your rustic mess is a threat to property values." I glanced at the wilderness stretching to the horizon. "What community?" "There aren't any houses here. The Pine Valley Homeowners Association governs all properties in this jurisdiction," she declared, producing a stamped document. "Your uncle signed these covenants when we established 6 months ago. You inherited his obligations." I stared at her. 6 months ago? My uncle died 8 months ago. She shoved a cease and desist order at me, along with a bill for $20,500 in fines. "Remove all materials within 48 hours, she said flatly. "Daily fines of $500 start immediately, doubling each week." We take community standards very seriously. The threat hung in the mountain air like smoke. But then came the dagger. "Let me be honest, Mr. Brennan," she said, her eyes scanning my worn clothes, battered truck, and rough hands. "This isn't the type of neighborhood where people like you usually succeed. We hold certain expectations about resident quality. I'd hate for your daughter to be embarrassed by unpleasant matters." The mention of Emma hit like a fist to my chest. She had researched me, my divorce, my struggles, my kid. "Are you threatening my family?" I asked, my voice colder than I meant. Victoria's smile sliced like ice. "I'm offering advice. Some fights aren't worth picking, especially when you're already outmatched." With that, she climbed back into her BMW, paused, and added, 48 hours. Mr. Brennan, don't make this harder than it has to be. Then she vanished down the mountain road. I stood clutching the cease and desist order, hearing Uncle Silas's last words echo through my head. Don't let anyone push you around.
Victoria Ashworth strutted back onto my half-built plot thinking she'd already won. She had no idea how badly she'd miscalculated. She didn't wait the 48 hours. She returned the next morning with a swagger that screamed lawyer and a confidence that looked like handcuffs. A battered Honda Civic rolled up behind her BMW and outstepped the most pathetic excuse for legal counsel I'd ever seen. Douglas Cranky looked like he earned his law degree from a cereal box. Cheap suit, coffee-stained tie, a briefcase held together with duct tape and panic. "Mr. Brennan," Victoria announced with all the drama she could muster. "You're being served. Cease construction immediately or face the consequences." Cranky shuffled through papers like a man praying for credibility. "Per Pine Valley HOA covenants, you owe $15,000 in retroactive penalties. Also, you never received required HOA disclosure documents at the time of transfer, which voids your ownership claims. 15 grand to build on my own land." The stench of Cranky's nervous sweat braided with Victoria's perfume into a foul cloud of legal menace. "I'll have my attorney review these," I said, steady. Victoria laughed, brittle as broken glass. "You can't afford one, Mr. Brennan. Save yourself the humiliation." The minute they left, I drove to the county courthouse. Betty, the clerk with a warm smile and a talent for records, helped me dig. The musty smell of old files and the buzz of fluorescent lights made it feel like a detective movie, and what we uncovered made my blood boil. The Pine Valley HOA had been formed exactly 6 months ago, 2 months after Uncle Silas died. The timing was impossible. The boundaries had been drawn like a bullseye around my property, including only 12 houses. My 5 acres made up nearly 60% of their total land. "Someone drew those lines to trap your uncle's land," Betty muttered, pointing at the map. I pulled deeper, and every HOA member turned out to be either Victoria's kin or employed by her husband's construction company. This wasn't community governance. It was a scheme with a letterhead. I knew enough about contracts to realize dead people can't be retroactively bound. Time for my counter. I called Sarah Kim, a real estate shark who smelled like fresh coffee and refused to lose. "This is legally impossible," she said, spreading out the paperwork. "You can't bind a deceased person to covenants created after their death. We'll file counterclaims, harassment, false claims, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and challenge how they shoehorned your property into boundaries drawn after the transfer." But Victoria kept escalating. 2 days later, she held an emergency community meeting and conveniently left me off the invite list. My neighbor Jake went and came back with the worst kind of gossip. Victoria had painted me as a dangerous transient. Fear spread faster than truth in small towns. Then the social media assault started. Victoria set up a Pine Valley Community Safety Facebook group and plastered my photo stolen from an old union newsletter with posts about transients and predators. The comments turned vicious. "Get this predator out. Kids aren't safe. Call the sheriff." Her hubris became her undoing. In a rush to show the HOA had funds for legal action, she publicly posted their finances, and the numbers told a scandalous story. $847,000 collected in special assessments in 6 months from 12 houses. That's over $70,000 a family. For what? No amenities, no projects, nothing. When Sarah saw the public post, she nearly choked on her coffee. Victoria had just handed me proof of massive financial fraud on a silver platter. The next morning, a county inspector showed up and handed me citations for building violations that would stop construction cold. "Orders from the top," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. Someone at the county had serious pull, and it smelled like corruption. Victoria had crossed from harassment into using public offices to pursue personal vendettas, and she'd just given me federal-level evidence. Federal investigators go after fraud and bribery. They don't ignore county officials doing favors for developers. Then it went violent. At 3 a.m., I woke to breaking glass and the acrid tang of diesel. My site looked trashed. Lumber cracked by a bat, my generator tipped over and leaking fuel onto the pine needles, roofing nails scattered like booby traps. My truck had 4 flats, and an anonymous EPA complaint landed in my inbox claiming I'd destroyed wetlands, a tiny seasonal creek that had been on the land long before Victoria was born. By noon, cars clogged my driveway entrance, not blocking it outright, but placed to make access a chore. Fake, hazardous construction signs popped up, scaring my contractor Pete into a panic with calls about contamination. Victoria had weaponized my community and connections. Desperate people leave traces. Sarah and I chased paper trails at the courthouse and found the missing piece. Mountain Vista Resorts had proposed a $50 million luxury development and needed my 5 acres as the scenic centerpiece. According to planning notes, they couldn't proceed without consolidating all residential parcels in the corridor. My land was the golden key. A $400,000 community relations fee in the planning documents looked less like consulting and more like a payoff. Suddenly, Victoria's rush made brutal sense. She was collecting commissions to deliver my property to developers. I wired up cameras and motion sensors that night. Around midnight, a truck crept down my access road with its lights off and someone poured accelerant on my lumber pile. The footage was crystal clear. Tommy Ashworth, Victoria's son, staring straight into the lens. The next morning, I walked into the sheriff's office with USB drives full of evidence. Tommy's arson, license plates, facial recognition, and Victoria's concerned citizen narrative unraveled on the spot. Meanwhile, HOA filings exposed more theft. Payments to ghost companies, landscaping invoices to a brother-in-law living in Florida, phony security consulting bills. Victoria had been looting the HOA while positioning herself for the resort payday. She was stealing from neighbors to line up her big win. When Tommy's footage proved arson, Victoria panicked and went nuclear. A process server served me an emergency injunction accusing me of operating an illegal transient housing operation and demanding immediate demolition. The paperwork read like fiction: $100,000 in community damages and a restraining order barring me from my own land. By noon, 3 county inspectors swarmed the site, writing bogus citations while muttering apologies about orders from above. The nastiest blow hit at the heart. My ex-wife Linda called, voice shaking. Emma was getting harassed at school. Friends were sharing Facebook posts labeling me a sex offender. My daughter was terrified and crying. Victoria had weaponized lies to wreck my relationship with the one person who mattered most. That night, Jake brought me more intel. 3 HOA families had been coerced into signing statements against me under threat of higher assessments. But Beth Morrison, the HOA treasurer, had been asking the wrong questions about missing money and found invoices for companies that didn't exist. Victoria had been dodging audits while squeezing members for more cash. Cornered, greedy, and running out of time, Victoria had become reckless and exposed the whole racket. She'd bitten off a lot more than she could chew, and in doing so, she'd finally given me the evidence I needed to fight back.
She demanded a full financial review, and suddenly Victoria started to panic. That panic handed me the opening I'd been waiting for. I rang Sarah immediately. This was the crack to collapse her whole house of cards. "If we force an emergency HOA audit before she wipes records, we trap her," Sarah said. Then she added the knockout. "False accusations of someone being a sex offender can be prosecuted as federal defamation. We can lodge criminal charges while we pursue the financial fraud." Still, I wanted to hit her where it hurt most, her bank account. The next morning, I drove around town to every business the Ashworths used. With screenshots of Victoria's bogus posts branding me a dangerous predator, I spoke calmly and plainly to managers about the liability of backing a defamatory campaign against a neighbor. Word spreads fast in small mountain towns. When the auto shop, grocery, and hardware store quietly sidelined the Ashworth family, gossip moved faster than smoke. By afternoon, Victoria's mother was calling, furious about being shunned. That evening, as rain began ticking on my cabin windows, I finally felt momentum swing in my favor. Victoria had overreached, attacking too many fronts while her financial scheme unraveled. But desperate people don't quit quietly. They blow everything up. The scent of wet pine reminded me of Uncle Silas's warning about the land's secrets. Tomorrow, I suspected, would reveal what he meant. Secret with the power to topple kingdoms. The next morning, I was prying up old floorboards. In Uncle Silas's workshop, when my crowbar struck metal, clank that rang through the dusty air like destiny. Beneath decades of sawdust and motor oil, I unearthed a military green steel lockbox, roughly briefcase size, sealed with an ancient combination. Using Uncle Silas's birthday, the same date he'd said he bought the property, I cracked it open. The mildew smell of old paper hit me in waves. Inside lay manila folders fat as phone books, corporate seals that felt as weighty as coins, and reams of legal paperwork enough to choke a courtroom. The top document that made my hands tremble. Brennan Holdings, LLC, incorporated March 15, 1998, sole proprietor Silas J. Brennan. My uncle hadn't just owned 5 acres. He'd quietly built a holding company 27 years earlier and used it to acquire something that would change everything. The next folder explained the stunt. In 2010, the developer who'd plotted Pine Valley went bankrupt in the housing crash. While everyone else was running, Uncle Silas bought defaulted mortgage debt for pennies on the dollar. Not the houses, but the land beneath them. Every parcel in what later became Victoria's HOA sat on land held by his company. Homeowners thought they owned their lots. Legally, they were tenants. The property management company collecting monthly payments forwarded them to Brennan Holdings. It suddenly made sense how a reclusive hermit lived comfortable. I was holding deeds to an entire neighborhood, 47 houses including the 12 that formed Victoria's HOA, all legally mine. The lingering scent of his pipe tobacco and old leather pressed in my chest as the document's implications crashed over me. Victoria had been extorting fees and threatening fines on land she didn't own. Her own house, the command center of her intimidation, sat on ground she was 3 months behind on rent. I could evict her with 30 days' notice. The bank records in the box showed every dollar. Monthly rents into Brennan Holdings accounts, property tax receipts, maintenance expenses that the HOA members thought were covered by their fees. Uncle Silas had been the invisible landlord collecting rent, while neighbors believed they were owners. Sitting in that workshop, files spread around me like evidence piles, I felt the scale of choices open up. I could evict the whole harassment ring. I could sell to Mountain Vista Resorts and become rich overnight. I could smash lives the way Victoria tried to smash mine. But Uncle Silas's last words kept echoing, "Don't let anyone push you around." Not push back harder, a subtle distinction that mattered.
Sarah and I spread the incorporation papers across her conference table.
The room smelled of fresh coffee and consequence. "This is airtight," she said, tracing the state seals and notarizations. He dotted every I and crossed every T for 27 years. She sketched options like a campaign planner. Plan A, reveal landlord status and negotiate dissolution of the HOA cleanly, removing Victoria's power. Plan B, selectively terminate leases of the harassment ringleaders, sparing innocent neighbors. Plan C, go nuclear, public exposure, federal investigation, total upheaval. Plan D, expose the crimes but offer the community a solution. Reduced rents, routes to true ownership. Transform this toxic HOA into something that helps families. While Sarah dug precedent, I called Jake, my electrician buddy, to help with the tech side. "You're gonna need this recorded," he said, helping test a professional audio rig. "When you drop a bomb like this, every word needs to be on the record." I thought back to my apprenticeship lesson. The most effective electrical systems deliver exactly the right current. Too little and nothing happens. Too much and you burn the house down. This required calibrated power. That afternoon, I met Beth Morrison, the HOA treasurer, at the diner where pie and honest talk felt safe. Beth confessed she'd been suspicious for months. "We've paid $847,000 in special assessments this year," she said, voice trembling. "And I can't find where it went." I slid photocopies of fraudulent invoices across the table, payments to ghost companies, consulting fees for non-existent services. Her hands shook as she read. "She's stealing from us," Beth whispered. "But exposing her could ruin neighbors who put life, savings into these homes. That's when Plan D made sense, justice with a path forward." Over the next 2 days, Sarah and I crafted a presentation to serve multiple purposes. Expose Victoria, protect families, and invite reform. Legal packets were prepared in triplicate and sent to federal investigators who handle HOA fraud. I called Emma and told her the truth for the first time since Linda's frantic call. Her tiny voice brightened as I explained that the social media smears were lies. "So I'm not in trouble, Dad?" she asked. "No," I told her. "It's all fake. Soon everyone will know." I warned her that truth delivered at the right moment beats lies. The big meeting was set for Friday night at the Pine Valley Community Center. Victoria had called it as an emergency to rally the neighborhood against the dangerous individual. She had no idea she'd be giving us the stage for her own undoing. I sat in my finished cabin that night listening to the creek and the stars, feeling Uncle Silas's presence. He had kept this secret for decades, waiting for the right person and moment. That moment had arrived, and unlike Victoria's scorched earth ways, this revelation could build something better from her ashes. Victoria's desperation spiraled. She tried to have me committed. An emergency petition landed Tuesday claiming I was mentally unstable and a threat. Her sworn statement painted me as a nightly stalker, a would-be arsonist, and a paranoid conspiracist, complete with fabricated witness statements from HOA members. The claim smelled like fiction but looked official. Then a convoy of pickups, Victoria's citizen patrol, gathered at the end of my access road, rifles visible, righteousness simmering. They didn't set foot on my property, but their message was loud and clear: step out of line and face frontier justice. Watching them from my porch with binoculars, the taste of fear was metallic in the air. Then Jake called with the worst news. Victoria's brother-in-law is the county sheriff, and he planned to serve the mental health warrant with a full SWAT response, claiming I was armed and dangerous and requiring maximum force. My blood ran cold. Back when I worked as an electrician, I wired houses for people who'd been swatted during neighborhood disputes. Too often, those stories ended in gunfire and body bags. That memory sat heavy as Victoria's smear campaign spiraled into fresh madness. But her overreach was also creating cracks in her support. That afternoon, Emma called me in tears. Not ashamed this time, but furious. "Dad, kids at school are saying you're a terrorist planning to shoot up the neighborhood. How can she lie like this?" I told her desperate people always double down, but sometimes desperation is what breaks them. Her voice hardened. She sounded more like me than I'd realized. "What can I do to help? I'm not letting this woman wreck our family with lies." While Victoria tried to paint me as a maniac, Sarah's investigator discovered she'd quietly withdrawn $127,000 from HOA accounts in just 2 weeks. The spending was disguised as security consulting and emergency legal costs. At the same time, she was forcing HOA members to sign loyalty pledges swearing not to cooperate with outside investigators. 3 families had already slipped Sarah evidence, terrified but unwilling to confront her publicly. Then came her biggest blunder. The mental health petition required a professional evaluation. Victoria submitted a psychiatric report signed by Dr. Richard Peaton, a man who had been dead for 6 months. Sarah's paralegal dug up the death certificate in minutes. Victoria had literally forged a psychiatric evaluation using a deceased doctor's letterhead and signature stamp. That one reckless lie elevated her situation from civil fraud to federal document forgery, a felony worth 10 years in prison. Sarah shook her head over the evidence. "She's unraveling. This kind of crime screams financial deadlines she can't delay. That resort deal must be collapsing." Victoria's unraveling didn't stop there. Thursday night brought her most reckless move yet. Security footage caught her sneaking onto my property after midnight, hauling a gas can and matches. Her plan? Ignite a small fire near my lumber pile, then call 911 claiming I was burning evidence. The irony was perfect. The woman branding me an arsonist was literally attempting arson to frame me. But my upgraded system turned midnight into broad daylight the moment she crossed my driveway. Floodlights blazed, cameras rolled from 3 angles, and Victoria froze center stage like a criminal caught at curtain call. Her scream echoed through the valley before she bolted back to her BMW. Watching the video, I realized she'd just handed me the ultimate trump card, undeniable footage of her attempting the exact crime she accused me of. Tomorrow's community meeting was going to be even more explosive than planned. By Friday morning, the chaos had bloomed into a full circus. Helicopter rotors thundered overhead, exhaust from emergency vehicles thickened the mountain air, and news vans clogged my access road. Through my windows, I saw deputies, reporters, and half the county's emergency crew forming a perimeter around my cabin. My phone buzzed with reporter calls asking the same question. How do you respond to claims you're holding the neighborhood hostage with explosives? Explosives? I stepped onto my porch with my coffee and was instantly greeted by 6 rifle scopes aimed at my chest. "Marcus Brennan," Sheriff Davidson's voice boomed from a megaphone. "You are surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. The surreal taste of terror filled my mouth as I realized Victoria had escalated to her nuclear option, branding me a domestic terrorist preparing for a violent standoff. Jake's voice cracked through my phone. "Marcus, don't move. Victoria told them you threatened to blow up the community center tonight. She's even got photos of you with suspicious packages." The packages were bags of concrete mix for my foundation. The witnesses, likely the same ghosts who swore to her forged psych eval. For once, though, law enforcement wasn't buying everything. Sheriff Davidson approached my porch carefully, but his face showed more embarrassment than fury. "Marcus, I know this is probably garbage, but the feds are breathing down my neck. Let us search your property so we can clear this mess." I nodded and handed him a USB drive. "Check last night's footage first." His expression shifted colors as he watched Victoria, lit up in my driveway, trying to torch my property with a gas can. "Well," he muttered, "that's going to complicate her credibility." While the bomb squad wasted hours confirming my concrete mix was exactly that, Sarah filed emergency motions charging Victoria with false police reports, attempted arson, and terror hoaxes, federal crimes carrying decades in prison. The media frenzy didn't slow down. By afternoon, crews from Denver arrived, eager to cover a supposed mountain standoff with a terrorist. Victoria seized her last spotlight, standing before cameras with perfect makeup and staged tears. She played the role of tragic heroine defending her community from a dangerous extremist. "This man has threatened our children, destroyed our safety, and now he's ready to commit mass violence rather than follow simple rules," she sobbed. It was Oscar-level fiction, but her strategy had a fatal flaw. She agreed to live interviews without legal coaching, forgetting that live TV leaves no room to edit. Channel 7's investigative reporter, Maria Santos, had done her homework. During what Victoria expected to be a softball segment, Maria dropped the hammer. "Mrs. Ashworth, records show your HOA collected nearly $850,000 in special assessments this year. Can you account for how that money was spent?" Victoria's polished mask faltered like a candle in the wind. "Well, we've had significant legal costs fighting this dangerous man," she began. Maria pressed. "But your filings show only $23,000 in legal expenses. Where's the rest? Where did the missing $827,000 go?" The silence that followed on live television lasted only 3 seconds, but it felt like 3 years. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled onto a dock, scrambling to invent an answer that wouldn't further incriminate her. That's confidential community business," she finally muttered. "Confidential? On live television while accusing me of terrorism?" The reporter pressed. Surely financial transparency mattered when credibility was at stake. By nightfall, the story had flipped completely. No longer was I the dangerous hermit threatening civilization. Now Victoria Ashworth was the HOA president, under fire for fraud and false terror claims. Social media swarmed with questions about her bookkeeping and the suspicious timing of her escalating accusations. When the last news van rolled down the mountain road, leaving behind only exhaust and tire marks, I realized she'd just committed professional suicide in front of the entire state. Tonight's meeting would no longer be about me. It would be her turn to face neighbors demanding answers. The hunter had just become the hunted. The Pine Valley Community Center had never seen such a crowd. Nearly 90 people packed into a room meant for 60, with news crews lining the walls and county officials seated up front like trial judges. The heavy air reeked of nerves, sweat, and old carpet. At the podium stood Victoria, dressed in a sharp suit, flawless makeup, her PowerPoint cued and ready. The title blared, "Protecting Our Community, the Marcus Brennan Threat Assessment." She clicked to the first slide, my cabin on display. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying like a general before battle, "we are here to address the clear and present danger that Marcus Brennan represents to our peaceful lives." I sat in the back row, clean work shirt on, leather folder in hand. Inside, enough legal dynamite to flatten her empire. Sarah sat beside me, her phone buzzing with updates from federal investigators still digging into Victoria's accounts. Her presentation was pure theater, dramatic photos of my construction projects framed as ominous, screenshots of my online posts twisted into threatening messages when they were really just electrical tips for contractors, and charts suggesting property values dropped wherever transients lived. Then she raised her voice with righteous conviction. This man owes our community $97,000 in unpaid fines and legal fees. He has threatened our families, intimidated our children, and just yesterday was investigated for terrorism. Fearful murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victoria knew her audience, decent people softened by months of steady lies primed to believe. She pushed harder. Furthermore, his presence threatens a major economic opportunity. Mountain Vista Resorts has offered us a $50 million development that will create jobs and raise property values. There it was. The truth finally out, recorded on camera for all to see. Her harassment had always been about clearing my land for developers. She invited victim impact statements. 3 rehearsed neighbors delivered shaky voices and tearful stories about how unsafe they felt near me. The staging was so polished it might as well have been community theater. Then came her final mistake. Does anyone else have concerns about this dangerous individual? Slowly I rose. The leather folder was tucked beneath my arm. I do, her confident smile faltered. You're not a member of this community. You don't belong here. I walked toward the podium, calm and steady. Actually, Victoria, I think you'll find I have every right to speak. More rights than anyone in this room. Confusion buzzed through the crowd. Victoria paled as I stopped at the front. My name is Marcus Brennan. I am the sole owner of Brennan Holdings, LLC. I raised Uncle Silas's incorporation documents high for the cameras, which means I own the land beneath every house in this subdivision. The silence was crushing. Then chaos erupted, gasps, shouting, chairs scraping. Neighbors turned on one another in shock. Victoria lunged at my papers like a drowning woman clutching for air. Impossible. We own these homes. I laid the deeds across the podium like cards. You own the structures. The land beneath them has belonged to my family's holding company for 27 years. Every HOA fee you've collected, you were stealing from people to manage land that wasn't yours. Sheriff Davidson stepped forward, voice grave. Mrs. Ashworth, it appears you've been charging association fees on property Mr. Brennan controls. Her mask shattered. You can't do this. I built this community. You're just a drifter. I pulled one last document. You're also 3 months behind on your own rent, which means I have grounds to evict you in 30 days. The room exploded again. She screamed, tried to seize the deeds, but Davidson restrained her. I raised my voice above the chaos. I'm not here for revenge. Those who harassed my family have 30 days to leave. Everyone else? Your rent is cut in half. We're building a real community. The crowd erupted, and federal agents entered to arrest Victoria for fraud, arson attempts, and terror hoaxes. Dragged from the room, her final shriek echoed, I am this community. But communities aren't built on lies. They're built on truth. 3 months later, I sat on my porch, watching neighborhood kids play where Victoria once posted restricted access signs. Emma ran up, clutching a letter. Dad, I got into Colorado State, full scholarship. She hugged me tight, smelling of her mother's shampoo and hope. They loved my essay about how my dad taught me strength isn't revenge, it's rebuilding after corruption. Victoria was serving 18 months in federal prison, ordered to pay $150,000 restitution. 6 of her cronies had left town, while 41 families embraced our community's rebirth. Jake's barbecue smoke drifted over the valley as neighbors once fearful now borrowed my tools and brought me casseroles. It's amazing how quickly fear fades once the source disappears, Sarah said, smiling as she joined us with a beer. Together, we'd turned harassment into healing. The Justice Fund we built with recovered money was already helping families fight corrupt HOAs across 3 states. Emma glanced up from her scholarship packet, her eyes fierce with determination. Dad, are we helping that Oregon family who called about City Hall stealing their farm? I smiled. We're going to try, sweetheart. Uncle Silas believed real power builds communities. Twilight settled across the peaks as Sarah handed me a thick envelope postmarked Portland. Another fight, another chance. Emma grinned mischievously. Let's do it, Dad, but this time I'm helping with the legal research. Children's laughter rang out across the valley where Victoria's threats once echoed. The sweetest victory wasn't revenge. It was building something so strong, it erased every trace of her corruption.